Sorry for that interruption. Once again, nothing I can really do or that any of us can do when you have these Wi-Fi outages. Spectrum service in my area, it's just kind of ironic. I mean, when I have bad luck with the connection and stuff, it's always, random. But continue to plow forward. Don't be deterred. Don't worry. Just take it with a grain of salt. This is part of our online experience together while we deal with the pandemic. I have good Wi-Fi service. I pay a lot for my 5G Wi-Fi connection, but I guess there's intermittent outages that can sometimes happen. And when it does, we have to just have a short break in our stream, reestablish it, and then come back to the same channel. This would be happening whether it was Zoom, YouTube, or anything else, because none of my web browsing function works once Wi-Fi is lost. So I'm on a 5G connection now, mobile data, no way it's going to get disconnected. Why don't I start with mobile data? Well, because I like to actually use the phone as a sort of backup monitor when Wi-Fi is on. And I can't watch the video of the lecture on the phone simultaneously while I'm using it as a mobile hotspot because it overloads the bandwidth, and then that really sort of causes the live stream to not work that well. So that's the reason really why I start with Wi-Fi always, and I just assume that it will work. But if it doesn't and something happens and we have a temporary outage like that, then I have to switch over to mobile data, and it takes a few minutes to reestablish. But we're back. So I'm giving you guys a couple moments for some of the other members to arrive. Maybe you'll be able to tell me where your connection dropped out, because I think I lectured on for a minute before I noticed that the feed wasn't really coming through. So we were defining the fallacy of composition, right, guys? This is the full definition and the form that it takes above. But let me ask you, what is the last point that you heard me just now talking about, and then I'll kind of bring us back into the discussion again. Hi, guys. Sorry for that, but it's just in the nature of things. The word erroneously? Okay. Well, then we have a lot to say. Okay, so let me go back over this, guys. This is the fallacy of composition. You can sort of say that it is like a close cousin or sibling to the fallacy of division, because it's much similar to that fallacy, it just goes in the opposite direction. So with division, as I was telling you, that fallacy says that some group has a given quality, and there's an individual who is a member of that group. So therefore, this individual must have the same quality. And I was trying to, with division, tell you that, of course, we can give examples where we see that that's fallacious. If the United States is the wealthiest country, and one of us is a citizen, a member of that collection, that does not imply that each individual member has this kind of wealth, okay? So now with composition fallacy, it's parallel to that in the opposite direction. So what it says, okay, is that a characteristic of a member of a group is incorrectly, meaning erroneously done in error, incorrectly assumed to be a characteristic of the whole group. So composition fallacy starts in this way. You note that there's some individual, we'll just label X for the purposes of generality. X is a member of this group. Then suppose that we note furthermore in the second premise that that individual has a certain feature, characteristic C. The apparent conclusion would be that the whole group has the characteristics that the individual has. But that's not necessarily true. So let me give you some examples. Suppose that like X refers to room 101 within a hotel. Suppose that room 101 is one of the rooms of the hotel. So the group here is the whole hotel, and the member is one of the rooms. So say we've got one room of the hotel, and the room is small. So that's the characteristic of the room, the member of the group, is that it is small. Does that imply that the whole hotel is small? No. Obviously, you can have a big hotel, which is formed by individual parts that are each small. So just because rooms of the carry across to the whole thing that the hotel is being small. All right? Let me give you other examples. Take the atoms that form, or yours or anybody's, but I'm using myself as an example. So I'm built out of atoms. A whole bunch of them collected together, aggregated, form the mass of my body. So one individual atom in my body, let's say that's a member of the group, you know, this mass that I am. Now that atom is invisible to the naked eye. So if you wanted to look at like one of the atoms in my body, you're not going to be able to see it just with your eyes. You would have to have, you know, an atomic like electron microscope to see that. So anyway, the point is that each atom in my body is invisible to the naked eye. So does that imply that my whole body is invisible to the naked eye? Clearly not, because you're looking at me right now. And so the point, therefore, is that even though each individual atomic particle that forms what I am cannot be seen without a microscope, obviously the whole thing that forms in aggregate from the parts, my body, can be seen by the naked eye. So it's not always true that the parts of a whole have the same qualities that the whole has got. Okay, so sometimes the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and in that case, or in other cases, the individual parts have features that the whole does not have. Okay, so you kind of get the format. There's a small room in the hotel. That doesn't mean the hotel overall is small. The individual atoms in my body can't be seen without a microscope. That doesn't mean the whole body cannot be seen without a microscope. Here's another example from the book, okay? And then we'll move on to the next batch of fallacies, guys. So sodium and chloride, those two elements in the periodic table, are highly dangerous to human beings. So on their own, those two things are toxic to people and could kill you. So does that mean that sodium chloride, the thing that is formed when you combine those two elements, is deadly to human beings and dangerous? No. Sodium chloride, if you're not aware, is just the scientific name for table salt, NaCl, sodium chloride. That's just what salt is. So the two individual components that form this molecular structure are highly dangerous to human beings. But when they combine, they form a whole, NaCl, that's not dangerous at all. Table salt is obviously a staple of our diet and the way we eat. So anyways, keep in mind then that sometimes you have individual members of a group, and that doesn't generalize to the whole. Maybe I'll give you one more. I'm a member of my family, the Vulich family, okay? And so that's me. Dr. Vulich is a member of the Vulich family, and I have a PhD. I'm a doctor. Does that mean that my family is a family of doctors? No. In my case, I'm certainly the only one within my family that has this kind of educational attainment. So members of groups sometimes have features that the whole group, which they are a part of, do not have. And so Stacy, sure. Others though, can I ask a quick question? I want to just know for the purposes of my own knowledge. Do all of you have a blurry view of the screen right now? Is that on my end? It probably is, but not to worry. I mean, I will type the question or the answer information out. But I'm just wondering if you're all having issues with the video quality. Let's just ask that really fast, because that's informative to me. Okay, it's probably blurry because I'm using the phone to run us off of mobile data, since Wi-Fi was a little bit spotty earlier. So let me please type out the information. Not to worry, guys. Well, if it improves, let me know that as well, because it's nice to be aware of the state of the connection that we have. Okay, you're saying earlier it was, it's not so much now. Well, I'll cover all my bases, all right, guys? So composition. And it's fine now? Okay, wait, let me ask Stacy. What about you, Stacy? Because you're the first one to say you had the issue. How does it look for you now? Because if it's okay, all we need to have is the video quality good for at least a little while, and then for sure the notes remain in the archive. It's better? Okay, Stacy, but thank you for bringing it to my attention. I certainly want to know if the bandwidth drops enough for a sufficient amount of time, then I'll go to typing, okay? But since we can see it now, hopefully that's all right. And I'll just read it again. Composition. A characteristic of a member of a group is incorrectly assumed to be a characteristic of the whole group that it is a member of. So like maybe I'm really loud. Does that mean that my family is loud because I'm a part of that family? No, that would be composition fallacy. The other thing could happen too. You could have an example where my family is loud and I'm a member of my family. Does that mean that I'm loud too? No, I could be the one that's a little different from the rest. So just examples, guys. continue then. So we're done with the fallacies of ambiguity now. And I can clear the board. And now we're going to move on to the second category of fallacies, which are fallacies of relevance. Yeah, and to anybody who found their way back to the meeting, thank you so much for being here. Sorry for the little interruption. It's bound to happen at times, but we're just going to keep plowing forward. Okay, so now we have a new category of fallacies, fallacies of relevance. What is the overall definition of such fallacies? So within this category, one or more of the premises in the argument is irrelevant to or it is unrelated to the conclusion. Okay, so when one or more of the premises in the argument is irrelevant or unrelated to the conclusion. Okay, so that is the overarching definition of fallacy of relevance. Let's keep this in mind, okay? The fallacy of relevance is not the name of an individual fallacy. It's the name of a category of fallacies. So underneath this subject heading, fallacy of relevance, there are 8 members. So just know that. Sometimes, I'm going to assign a homework assignment on fallacies later today for you guys. It's going to have to do with this category, the fallacies of relevance. And just know that the answer on that homework to none of the questions is the word fallacy of relevance, because that's like saying, tell me the name of a type of animal, a species, and you say mammal. Mammal is a classification of species. A species individually is like lion, tiger, bear, or whatever. So this is the definition of the concept, fallacy of relevance, but filed under this concept, there are 8 members. Okay, so we're now going to learn what are those 8 different fallacies of relevance. And of course, it's problematic to have an argument where the premises, which are supposed to be the evidence for the conclusion, are not relevant to the conclusion, that they don't prove it, or that they don't even have anything to do with the conclusion. So there's kind of like a mismatch between the evidence that's given to support the claim and the claim itself. So fallacies of relevance, you see the definition, when one or more of the premises in the argument is irrelevant or unrelated to the conclusion. Now, what are the fallacies of relevance? Let's list them out first, and then we'll go through them and explain. So here are the different examples. There's personal attacks. There's appeal to force. There's appeal to pity. Then you've got appeal to ignorance. And a couple more, hasty generalization. Hasty generalization. And then there's 2 more of these. Got what's called strawman. The word's just straw man. And finally, the last of the 8 is called red herring. Words red herring, okay? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Personal attack, appeal to force, appeal to pity, popular appeal, appeal to ignorance, hasty generalization, and then straw man and red herring. So these 8 different types of fallacies, or these 8 fallacies of relevance, are the subject matter of today's lesson that we want to cover. Okay, so we're going to cover all 8 of these. We're going to start with this one at the top, personal attacks. So the attack fallacy. Okay, so one thing to know about personal attack fallacy is that it sometimes is also known by a different name. So there's kind of like two names. One is this one, and then there's also a more formal name that comes from Old Latin. So since this fallacy has been around for so long and people have been able to identify it for so long, it also has this kind of classical Latin name, which is AdHominem. So I'm just going to put that in parentheses below so that you know that sometimes when you're looking at information on the personal attack fallacy, you're going to see people describe it under this name, AdHominem. AdHominem in Latin means to the man, to the person. So what is this? Personal attack fallacy is when you attack the person who gives the argument instead of giving a logical counter-argument itself. So instead of presenting a counter-argument, you attack the person in personal terms who made the argument. So that's the definition. Instead of presenting a counter, argument, one attacks the character, or one attacks the person who presented the argument. Okay, so when an AdHominem fallacy is committed, okay, Danny, let me type it out for you. No worries, yeah. There you go. So it says, either on the board or in the chat, personal attack, AKA, let's make sure you also know its other name, AKA AdHominem, also known as AdHominem. That's when, instead of presenting a counter-argument to what the person's argument is, you attack them directly. So imagine this. Somebody says to you, you know, there's a lot of evidence for man-made global warming. There's a lot of evidence that carbon emissions due to human industrial processes are causing greenhouse gases to accumulate, and therefore we should take action to stop that. So someone gives you this kind of reasonable argument. Suppose you don't like their argument, but instead of telling them why you think that's not true, you say, well, hey, hold on. I mean, listen, look at how you're even dressed right now. Are you really telling me that you think there's global warming? Because your outfit is just garbage. I mean, you are like, you're looking terrible today. So you don't know nothing about no global warming. Come on, get out of here. Well, what's wrong with that response? That doesn't really show any evidence as to why their argument was incorrect. It's just attacking them in personal terms. And that's no way to argue. That's no way to win an argument for sure, because at a minimum, it makes it seem as though you have nothing to say in reply. You have no kind of rebuttal to offer. Instead, you just go against the person, and now it becomes personal. That's not what you're supposed to do. When a person gives an argument, if you disagree with what their claim is, you have to give counter-argument. You have to give evidence that's reasonable to show why that's not true. And if the only thing you can do is insult the person, make fun of them, you know, your breath stinks, so how can you tell me you know anything about, you know, this policy? Like somebody says, I don't know, I think a wall is costly and expensive. It's not the right way to deal with our immigration issues. So I don't think that it's a sound policy. What do you say? The person's like, oh, come on. You don't know anything about what you're talking about because I can smell your breath from over here. Disgusting. So gross. You don't know, so you're wrong. That doesn't counter the argument. Whether the person's breath smells, whether you think that they don't know how to dress, you know, or anything else, this is irrelevant. What if somebody says, Dr. Fauci tells you through, you know, all this collected expertise at the CDC that you should wear masks, socially distance until we have an effective vaccine. And then somebody's like, but have you seen the guy throw a baseball? I mean, I saw him throw the opening pitch for the World Series or whatever, and the guy couldn't even throw it like 4 feet. So don't tell me he knows anything about what we should do when it comes to a deadly virus. That's not relevant. So this is not relevant information. When you attack the person, you're not even going against their argument. If anything, that makes it look like the other person has the stronger argument because they're at least giving you reasonable evidence. And in reply to them, you just start going off and making personal attacks. So that's not good. That's the fallacy of personal attack. I hope it makes clear enough sense. Sometimes with the personal attack fallacy, you just abuse the person directly. In other cases, you attack their circumstances. So there's kind of 2 subversions of personal attack. There's the abusive version and the circumstantial one. Like, for example, here in the book, they mention this. Raoul. So Raoul says, affirmative action is a reasonable policy to counteract of bias and discrimination in hiring and admissions. If we don't have such policies as this, people's inherent biases will cause them to favor some racial categories over others. So therefore, affirmative action is good. Suppose that someone does not like their argument, and this is what they say back. Oh, come on, Raul, aren't you Latino? If you're Latino, of course you're going to think affirmative action is good because you'd benefit from it. Well, that's not relevant. You're not supposed to consider the circumstances of the individual who makes the argument when they're giving the argument. You're just supposed to look at the argument itself as though it just comes from an anonymous source, whether the person's an immigrant, citizen of the United States, or anything in between. The argument is what you're evaluating, not the person who presents it. And so that would be another example of personal attack. How about this? Father says to the son, sees his son smoking, catches him smoking cigarettes. So he says, son, I need to talk to you. I've told you so many times smoking is very bad for your health. That's going to cause you cancer down the line, hurt your lungs. Come on, give it up. Don't smoke. It's bad for you. Imagine the son comes back and says, come on, Dad, look who's talking. You're a total hypocrite. You smoke a pack a day, so don't tell me nothing about stopping smoking. Well, is that an effective counter-argument? No, because has this way of responding shown that smoking's not bad for you? No. All it says is the one who's given this argument is kind of a hypocrite telling me that because they do one thing and they say another. But the question wasn't whether or not that person's consistent with what they say and do. The argument by itself is just cigarettes are unhealthy and they contain carcinogenic, toxic substances. So by attacking the person, calling them a hypocrite, you really haven't shown any kind of realistic counter-argument. Okay, and then some other examples from the book. Someone says, I believe there's extraterrestrial life, and someone says, well, you're an insane person, so maybe you don't know anything that you're talking about. So attacking the person's mental health or whatever, instead of just taking a look at their argument and kind of considering their premises. Pat and Chris, imagine this interaction. Pat says, I think abortion is wrong because it ends the life of a human being. Chris comes back with a personal attack. Oh yeah, you pro-life people are just a bunch of narrow-minded religious fanatics. And Pat comes back, he's like, oh yeah, Chris? Well, you are an anti-life, baby-killing Nazi, okay? So, like, look how off the rails that has gotten. It started off as a reasonable exchange of ideas on the policy of whether abortion is permitted or not morally, and it descends into mutual name-calling, and it gets very nasty. So the problem with AdHominem is that it's not relevant to the argument itself that you're trying to respond to, and so it really undermines your position within the dialogue or debate. And we shouldn't take the bait. The problem is that sometimes when others attack us personally, we can get away from being reasonable and logical, and we start to, attack them. Once someone says, you don't know what you're talking about, your breath smells, and you might be like, oh yeah, is that what you're going to say? Because, I mean, I could say about a bunch of bad stuff about you. Now we're no longer talking about the argument at all, or the information or the content there. We're just going back and forth, making fun of each other. So in life, whether it's politicians, members of the media, or everyday citizens like us, let's try and not go down into the gutter and just attack each other on personal terms. It's not supposed to be personal when we're talking about our arguments and views. We're just trying to come to the truth and exchange ideas and reason about them. Fallacies of relevance, the personal attack, AdHominem fallacy. Okay, after that, next one, it's called appeal to force. How are we doing with the screen video quality? Not so good? Decent? Not good? Let me know. But maybe I'll just write this one here in the chat as you're thinking of, as you give me your response in the live chat. So appeal to force. Okay, yeah, not to worry, Margarito. I'm gonna just make sure that this is all clear in the chat. So can you all read that, what it says? Oh, making sure you know the name of it. Okay. Okay, so what I wrote there, I'm sorry that I gave a name just after the definition, but to see the definition, when we use or threaten to use force to get somebody to back down from what they're saying and to instead accept your view. They call that appeal to force, and some also label it as scare tactics. So again, we have the primary name and then a sort of separate possible name that is given as well. Okay, so appeal to force, imagine this. So you're having a chat, one of those nice, lovely chats with your parents where you don't agree with them about something. Could be politics, could be religion, could be, you know, your choices and whether they agree with them or not. So suppose that it's come to this point. You've made your argument. Maybe it's something like, come on, mom and dad, I want you guys to understand that global warming is real or something. I'm not saying your parents wouldn't agree with that, but just let's take an example. Suppose someone says to their parents, global warming is real, I'm learning all about it in college. And then the parent is like, I'm so sick of you telling me all this crap that you're learning in college, and I don't agree with that. Listen, stop saying that global warming is real. If you don't you remember who pays your tuition? Okay, now what is the implied threat behind that message to the child, to the young person from the parent? You better stop talking all that stuff about global warming and how you believe in it, because don't forget who pays your tuition. So obviously, what can you tell me? What is the sort of scare tactic or threat here? Clear enough, but I just want you to maybe help me get it out there in the chat. So what do you think? Yeah, if the student keeps talking and making that conclusion or making that claim, then the parents will stop paying the tuition. So it's a threat for the revocation of the support. Make the argument that global warming is not real. Did this parent say, look, I got to show you, here's the real evidence that disqualifies your argument or shows why you've reached the wrong conclusion? No. Instead, the person is just making a threat. Now, the word force can be construed broadly. Obviously, the most literal example would be like, stop saying that or I'm going to punch you in the face right now. That would definitely be appeal to force and scare tactic. But sometimes it's pressure that's applied to somebody through some type of expressed intention to do something that they don't want you to do. Okay, so that's one example. Yeah, so do this or else, or believe this or else is kind of like the form of the appeal to force fallacy. Sometimes scare tactics are used, telling a person, hey, beware, if you believe that, then here's something terrible that could happen to you. Sometimes you see products that are being marketed to you where the whole sales pitch is to give you a sense of fear, right? So like they'll show like a person breaking into a house and everyone getting robbed unless you buy their security system. That maybe masks a rational consideration of whether you actually need the service or how effective the product is at addressing the need. So when people try to get you to believe something or to change your mind by scaring you or intimidating you, then they're not appealing to reason, but they're appealing to force, and that's a fallacy. Even if the person scares you, that doesn't prove that they're right. If your parents say, stop making these arguments to me that I disagree with, because if you keep it up, I'm going to throw you out of the house or stop paying tuition, they haven't made any case that your argument is wrong. They're just saying, stop it or else. and that's not rational. So if you don't agree with people, you always have reason at your hands. You can just use reason to kind of come up with an opposing argument and say, what do you think about those reasons? But once you start making fun of people or leveling threats, we're getting off the rails, and now we're committing fallacies and we're not reasoning properly. Okay, now one last thing though about the appeal to force / scare tactic. Not every time that you're warned about something is it necessarily a scare tactic. If the warning is reasonable and based on a rational assessment of what is likely to happen. So if somebody says, hey, don't drink and drive, because if you do, you very well might get into an accident and hurt yourself or hurt somebody else. Is that a scare tactic fallacy? No, because the person's not saying, I will do something bad to you if you believe that drunk driving is okay. They're just saying in the nature of that choice, you're putting yourself at risk and giving yourself danger. So a warning of harm that doesn't issue from the person giving the warning is not necessarily a scare tactic. Okay, so then we continue from there. Next one is called appeal to pity. Yeah. I'll write it on the board, but I'll also just type in the chat. Appeal to pity. So appeal to pity, I'm thinking you could probably even guess, just looking at the name. But here's what it is. Pity is invoked in an argument when pity is irrelevant to the conclusion. Here we go. Okay. Sorry, guys. The second word in the definition should say is. Pity is invoked in an argument when pity is irrelevant to the conclusion. Hopefully you can read that. So sometimes you want somebody to grant you special favor or to kind of give special consideration to you because you want them to feel sorry for you. But not every time that you appeal to feelings of sympathy and, you know, an emotional appeal is that relevant to the circumstances. So one possible example that the book mentions is take the case of getting a speeding ticket by like an officer. So you're going way too fast, officer pulls you over. You know how fast you're going, 20 miles over the limit, so I'm gonna have to ticket you today. Suppose you come back with this to the officer. Officer, yes, I was speeding, but look, I've just been having a really bad day. Last night, my partner broke up with me, and it's just been a tough 24 hours. So I'm going through all these tough emotions, and it's just, if I get a ticket now, can you imagine that's just gonna be so much more tough and difficult. So can we like just let me go here? I mean, you know, because feel sorry for me, basically. Now, maybe it's sad if a person loses a relationship or, you know, the pet dies or, you know, whatever, they didn't sleep well or they just got fired. But that's not really relevant to the question here at hand, which is, was the person in violation of the traffic laws? So this is just an attempt to evade personal responsibility or accountability by making an appeal to the feelings of pity that the officer may have. As a professor, I'm always treated to examples of the appeal to pity in just regular life. You know, when a student maybe wants to have some opportunity to avoid a deadline or to submit something late or whatever. And, you know, sometimes the excuses could be insufficient to justify any kind of special concession or treatment. Like if a person says, you know, I'm really sorry, but I watched this depressing, scary movie like last night and it totally threw me off and I couldn't do my work. So just show me a little pity here and give me an extension. I mean, in that case, again, the appeal to pity doesn't reach the level of seriousness or gravity that would justify some type of exemption of the rules. More examples from the book. I didn't have time to type up my assignment for class tomorrow because I promised my friend that I would meet them at the movies. And you know how it is with friends, you're not supposed to flake on them or break promises. So just, can you type it for me, or can I just not do it? Again, it's an appeal to the feeling of sympathy and pity on the person's behalf that you're asking for this favor from. Now, last thing though about the appeal to pity is this. As with scare tactics, there's sometimes examples where even though it might look like an appeal to pity, it's a reasonable argument or claim. For example, if the reason that you're asking for some type of special treatment goes beyond a certain level of concern and seriousness, then it might be fair. So if you say to the officer, officer, please don't give me a ticket. I know I was speeding, but can you see in the back seat I have a toddler that's choking on a quarter, and I could not wait for an ambulance to come and take us to the ER. So I'm just rushing through all these speeding, traffic signals to try and get them there so that they don't die. So can you please expedite my arrival to the hospital and don't ticket me? Now, in that case, you might say that, well, this is life and death, and therefore it kind of abridges the typical rule that you would enforce this law against the person. Or if a student comes to me and says, I'm in the emergency room, I've broken my leg, so can I have an extension on the paper? Then it would be unreasonable for me to say, oh, don't hit me with the pity party, appeal to pity. That's not serious at all. You got to still do your work. Obviously, if it crosses a certain threshold of gravity, then it's no longer just a weak appeal to pity kind of excuse, but rather something serious that deserves attention. Okay, so we've got our appeal to pity. That's 3 of these fallacies of relevance so far. Next one is popular appeal. Popular appeal. Okay, so that is when you appeal to popular opinion to gain support for your conclusion. So I'm going to write that here in the chat. Popular appeal, when one appeals to popular opinion in order to support their conclusion or claim. Sometimes you can think of this as the bandwagon approach. So, for example, what if someone is saying, God exists, and you're like, okay, tell me why you think that's true, or give me an argument. I want to hear your best argument why you think God exists. And they say, okay, here you go. If you look at just statistics, the majority of people, the overwhelming majority of people, up to 90% believe in God. So therefore, God exists because it's popular. That's not a good argument, because just because it's popular doesn't necessarily mean it's true. There are good arguments for God's existence, and I teach those in other philosophy classes. There's ontological argument, cosmological argument, argument from design, and that's just a few. But if you say, oh, it's true because everyone already thinks it's true, you haven't given any reason itself. You've kind of just cited the popularity of the view. And of course, what's popular or what most people believe is not always true, and in some cases, we've learned that over time. How about this? Somebody says, mandatory testing of students is a good way to measure how good a school is, because we did a poll that says 71% of parents of children in K through 12 favor mandatory testing. Well, just because it's popular with the parents doesn't mean that it's a sound policy. You should have people that are education experts making these determinations. So just going off of what's popular is not necessarily going to tell you what's the right thing or the best way to organize school and structure that. Sometimes people use poll data to try and justify a position, like, oh, most Americans think that this is a good idea, and therefore it is. Well, when you make the argument, though, you have to appeal to independent grounds. So you would have to say why it deserves the popularity that it has. Otherwise, right, we would be able to make all kinds of weird and fallacious arguments. What if somebody says, look, this is the #1 album, the most units and getting the most plays, so it's the best song. Obviously, if you guys know anything about art criticism, many people hold the view that what's the most popular is not actually the most high quality from like a artistic point of view. So, what would you think if you read a movie review that said this? This is the #1 movie in America, so clearly it is the best. Well, the review has to tell you why it deserves the popularity that it has managed to achieve. So whether it's a product, a service, or a claim that a person's using in an argument, you need better evidence than just saying, hey, everybody already thinks this, or the majority thinks this. Yeah, because sometimes popular songs are not necessarily good. At least there's a reasonable argument that they're not. Sometimes popular movies aren't. Or if you say, let's see, the Nike Air Force One is the best high-quality shoe because it's the most popular shoe for young people. The Air Force One is cool. It's a classic shoe. A lot of people love it, and it is popular. But just because of that, the popularity, you haven't told me what's good about it. You have to speak to its actual features to say why it's good. Or another example, iPhone is much better than Android because most people own the iPhone. Well, iPhone arguably is better than Android. I don't know. I mean, I actually have Galaxy 21 Plus, so I'm kind of an Android person. But if you thought that iPhone was the better phone, you'd have to appeal to reasons. You'd have to talk about its features, its ease of use, the camera, I don't know. And then you'd be able to build an argument with credibility that it's the better phone. But just saying, hey, it's better because most people prefer it, that's not enough. So popular appeal, guys. Hopefully that makes some decent sense. Let me just check in with you, making sure we're all still here because we had our little outage earlier. Everything's good. You can hear me at least and see the chat comments that I'm writing out and definitions. Just let me get your feedback really fast. Checking in with you. Just let me know. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Cool, so we've got popular appeal now to add to our roster of fallacies. We're going on to the next one, appeal to ignorance. Okay, so what's that one? The appeal to ignorance fallacy. This is when a person claims, thanks guys, thanks for your feedback. This is, okay, so I'll put it in the chat, making sure I do that. Appeal to ignorance. And you see here what it says, appeal to ignorance. When one claims that something is true, but why? Just because no one has proven that it is false. That's not effective proof. Proof of something requires actual evidence that supports the claim. It's not like you can prove something by saying there's no evidence or proof that it's false. Okay, so like for example, what if a person says to you, you know what, there are aliens in outer space, and here's the reason why. Because nobody can prove that they don't exist. So they must be out there. Because no one can prove that they don't. Now, would you fall for that argument? I hope not. Because it says that because no one can prove a negative, that they don't exist, then they therefore must. First of all, it's almost impossible to prove a negative, like that there's no aliens. What would that require? That you actually surveyed and canvassed the entire physical universe, which is not possible. And that after having done so, you've verified the non-existence of all the aliens, but that's not possible to do. So what would be proof of alien life is actually having evidence that establishes that they do exist. So if the Mars rover starts beaming back images of like little green men or footprints in the sand on Mars, you know, then we might have reasons to think that there are these life forms. But it's not a good enough reason to just say no one's proven the opposite. Okay, that would be like if someone said to you, hey, you're cheating on me, and the reason is because you can't prove you're not. I mean, you need actual evidence of the affair happening, not just prove to me that you're not. Okay, so appeal to ignorance. A person's appealing to the lack of counter evidence or disproof and saying that that by itself suffices as conclusive proof, and it just doesn't. So some other examples in the book. I don't know. I mean, you could do this with all kinds of random and ridiculous things. There must be leprechauns because who can prove they don't exist? Or there must be Bigfoot because no one can show that he's not real. Again, a proof of something existing or being a fact requires positive evidence, not just the absence of contrary evidence. The only one exception perhaps to this is like a legal thing, okay? So in law, you guys have heard that the law presumes that you're innocent until proven guilty. And that's important, but in everyday life, we don't think the same thing. In everyday life, you don't say, hey, something's true unless someone else can prove that it's false. Why do we have this exception in the case of law? Well, it's because if we didn't have this presumption in favor of innocence within the legal context, then it would be too easy for you to be jailed, imprisoned, and have your freedoms taken away. So like, you know, in the United States and in the Western constitutional systems that we have, we just could bend over backwards to force the government to make an irrefutable case, basically, that you are guilty. Otherwise, we would grant too much power to the government to deprive us of our liberties. But in everyday life, you can't just walk over to someone and say, hey, you stole something from me until you prove to me that you didn't. Obviously, though, there are reasons not having to do with like the rationality of one's belief, why we should not hold the same standard when it comes to judgments of guilt or innocence in the law. Okay, so anyway. Yeah. Cool, so appeal to ignorance. Hopefully that makes decent enough sense. What if somebody said, you know, they believe something that they can't prove, and then they kind of shift the burden of proof as though it's your job to disprove it. You know, hey, there was an election that was stolen, and the reason is because no one can prove that it wasn't. That's not evidence. You have to have evidence of a stolen election. You can't just tell other people. It's up to you to prove that it didn't happen. Okay, so a couple cases. Let's move on from appeal to ignorance. And the next one is what's called hasty generalization. Hasty generalization, what is that? So, let's see how I define it in the book here. Okay, I'll write it. Okay, hasty generalization is when we make a universal claim, which is based on a sample of experience or evidence that is either too small or is biased or unrepresentative, skewed. So what's a generalization first? A generalization is just a type of sentence that is an all sentence. So generalizations have the form all A's are B's. So like if I say to you that all men have a beard or something, that would be a generalization about men. It would say each and every single one, 100% of them have a beard. Now, when a person makes a generalization, a sweeping universal claim, an all statement, that requires extraordinarily strong evidence, because when you say all, etc., have this feature, that doesn't mean most of them do. It doesn't mean some of them do. It literally means every single one has that quality. So when you make such a sweeping generalization, you need very strong, powerful evidence. You can't say, oh, I'm drawing this conclusion from just a couple of pieces of supporting evidence. So like, for example, hasty, by the way, means too fast. So hasty generalization is kind of too quickly jumping to the conclusion of all based on a few examples or an insufficient number of examples. So like, take this as an example here. Suppose that someone says, you know, my father abused me. Then later on, when I got a bit older, I had a boyfriend, and the boyfriend also was abusive. So therefore, you know what? All men are violent abusers. Okay, well, it's a terrible thing, and no one should ever be abusive. But is it really reasonable to draw this universal claim based on a few examples drawn from one's own experience? Perhaps that is too quick to jump to the sweeping generalization of all men based on a few examples mentioned in that example. Here's another example from the book. Someone says, college education is the great equalizer in the United States because Oprah Winfrey, Starbucks founder Howard Schultz, and Kenny Trout, who founded Excel, they all came from very poor families, and they put themselves through college, and now they're all billionaires. So the person is saying that everybody could become a billionaire in the United States. But what is their evidence? They cite 3 individuals. And even if that's true of the 3 individuals, it's not enough evidence to say that this is the case for everybody and that the opportunities are there and the social opportunity to kind of reach the top tier of financial status is easily available. That's what it says. This statement is a hasty generalization based on only a handful of outdated cases. In fact, while 77% of young people from rich families graduate from college, only 9% from poor families earn a college degree, thus intensifying the gap between the rich and the poor, which is currently at a 30-year high. This growing gap is due in part to the rapidly rising cost of college education, so there's a little bit of extra information in the book there. But hopefully you get the point. Just citing 3 examples and saying, so everyone can do the same thing, that might be a hasty generalization. Let's see. another interesting point afterwards. Before we make a generalization, we should make sure that we have a sufficiently large and unbiased and up-to-date sample. After the death of the poet Lord Byron, a physician removed his brain and weighed it. He found that Byron's brain was 25% larger than the average brain. And this news, based on just a single sample, spread through the scientific community, contributing to the myth that there was a connection between brain size and high intelligence. So, you know, in all cases, a bigger brain means more intelligence. Not necessarily true, and that was a generalization derived from just one case. I don't know, someone says, my neighbor had a cat that just bit me and it was mean. And then one time I tried to have a cat, you know, never really became friendly, so I think cats are just like unfriendly animals. That would be a universal generalization drawn from the cases too. I don't know, just throwing some thoughts out there. So there's just two more of these fallacies of relevance, guys. We've got strawman and red herring. Okay, so maybe we'll be able to get through both. Hopefully we can. If we don't, at the top on Monday, we'll finish out those last few. And if it if it becomes the case that I have to finish the remaining fallacies on Monday, then I think to account for the additional time that that takes, I'll probably have to push the due date of homework 2 into the following week. Hopefully that's not a big issue for you, but I would think maybe the Monday of spring break week, you could just send it to me anytime over the weekend. It doesn't take that long to complete that homework. It's based on these fallacies of relevance. So if the due date needs to be adjusted, it'll be slightly modified ahead so that you have more time to work on it. Anyways, though, 2 more. And yes, I will be finished with you guys' midterms over the weekend. So once I'm ready, I'll let you know about that too. Okay, so fallacies of relevance. 2 more. There's also strawman. Strawman. So what is this strawman fallacy? See how I said it. So it's when you distort or misrepresent your opponent's argument to make it seem easier to refute. Okay, straw man. When you distort or misrepresent your opponent's argument to make it seem easier to refute. I actually see this one happen a lot on, like, you know, social media and just in politics and things. So imagine this. Someone makes a reasonable argument, but then when the person replies back to them to try and criticize their argument, they misrepresent what the person said. They make it seem either way more extreme or way more oversimplified than what it really was. So, like, for example, what if somebody said, I don't know, I don't think is the best way to deal with our immigration problem in this country. There's a more humane and more fiscally responsible alternative, and statistics show that it hasn't really resulted in the kind of reduction in the flow of drug trafficking, et cetera, that was the stated reason. So now, what would be a straw man reply back to that? What if someone says, okay, so what you're saying is just have no border controls and just let anybody come in whenever they want for any reason? If that's what you are saying, and that sounds like what you're saying, it's totally crazy, it's irrational, so your argument is wrong. What's the problem with that response? That response took the original position and distorted it out of recognition to make it sound way more insane than it was. Because if you just criticize one type of immigration policy, that doesn't mean that you think that there should be no such thing as controls or regulations and rules. Another possibility. Somebody says, you know, marijuana, I think, is not necessarily the most harmful drug. It's not as addictive as narcotics. And there's even some evidence, perhaps, that it has medicinal benefits. So I would say that because we have such high incarceration rates when it comes to some of these more benign drugs, that's one that should be federally legalized. What do you say? Now, what do you think would be the straw man reaction to that argument? Who could just make a guess? Someone says, marijuana at least doesn't seem to me to be the worst of all possible drugs. Look at this evidence. So why not legalize that? What could be a straw man fallacy which replies to that argument? So here's the idea. You got to say something like, so here is what you are saying. The other opponent now tries to rephrase their argument and states it in a way that's not accurate to what they said. So what do you think could be the way of misrepresenting this person's argument? Just throwing it out there. What do you say? So let me get you right. What you are saying is, now fill in the blank. What's the strongman? Gotta engage, get it in there. What's that possible reply that would be a strongman? Oh, so you're saying legalize all drugs? So what, we should have people out there smoking crack? And then how are people going to do their jobs? How are people going to raise kids? How are people going to operate machinery? Your argument's insane. You're saying legalize all the drugs. Wow, that's out of control. Well, that would be a strongman. That would be misrepresenting and distorting beyond what they said in their original argument. And we can think of other examples too. Suppose somebody says that, let me see, what are some other examples from the book? Okay. Somebody says people should be able to marry whoever they love, whether it's the same gender, something else, or anything in between, because we're all human beings and we should have equal rights when it comes to marriage. And then somebody says, okay, so here's what you're saying. We should not allow people to have heterosexual marriage anymore. Wow, so straight people can't get married? That's not fair. So your argument's terrible. But that's not what was argued in the original case. The person just said everyone should have the ability to marry a person of their choice, and it didn't say, let us try and destroy and dismantle, heterosexual monogamy or that kind of marital arrangement. What if somebody says, okay, genetically modified crops, that's something that we should perhaps take a look at, because that they should be subject to stricter regulations to promote the health of the environment. And someone says, okay, so what, no longer allow farming? If we don't have farming, we're all going to starve to death. So how can you really say we shouldn't farm? Did the person say don't farm and don't have agriculture? No, they criticized one particular method of agricultural production. So let me close with this. Why is it called strawman though? It's supposed to call it a metaphor of like a scarecrow, which is a man made out of straw. And the idea of that metaphor is, while you're attacking this fake version of their argument, you're not paying attention to what they really said. So it's like you're attacking this zombie strawman version of what they said. Meanwhile, the real argument is not being addressed. So when you reply to somebody, be charitable. Try and understand their argument in the best intended way that you think that they meant it. And then when you reply to it, you're replying to what they've actually made a case for, instead of trying to distort it out of bounds, make it sound radical or simple-minded, and then reply to the weird, exaggerated, overhyped version of the actual argument. Okay, so we got through 7 out of 8. The last one's red herring. It just takes a few minutes to explain red herring, but we'll get to it on Monday, I guess. For now, though, just have a great weekend. I'll notify you guys about the modified due date of homework number 2. I may just extend it into later in the week. Maybe I don't want it to necessarily be during your spring break, and for different reasons, you might not want that either. So maybe I'll have it due before the end of the day, Friday or something of next week, so that you'll at least have a few more days and you'll be able to consider all the concepts with plenty of time. Okay, so guys, let's just, I guess, end the meeting. Let me know that everyone's good to go. And then once you say signing off or whatever, then we can break until next week. So how's it going? Are we good to go? Perfect. Thanks, Nick. Thank you so much. It's nice to spend my birthday with you guys. Sorry for the little outages that happened at the beginning. Anybody who's watching this later because you tuned out of the lecture and you decided to just watch the replay, please come back to the meeting, though. It's nice to have no one lost, so that we don't lose members in the middle of the class period. But okay, not to worry. Thanks so much, everyone. It's nice to be with you guys on my birthday, and I will see you back on Monday. If you need anything in the meantime, please email me, but I'll be in touch either way. Okay, then. Have a good one, and until next time. Bye-bye.